welcome to Books and Brew. I'm your host, Andrew Huff. I'm a novelist, screenwriter, director, all-around media producer. And this show is about sitting down with fellow authors and getting to know their writing process so that I can steal their secrets for my own success. Now, here's the thing I know about writers is when we write, we love to have some kind of beverage with us. And that usually comes in the form of coffee or tea. And so while we get to know these authors, get to know about their books and what it takes to be a writer, I get to try their favorite writing brew right along with them. So let's meet today's guest and find out what I am going to be drinking. Stephanie Landsem has traveled since she was a teenager, from backpacking through Germany to riding camels in Morocco, and can confirm that travel is the best kind of research. She writes historical fiction for women about women. And when she's not writing historical fiction, Stephanie gardens, cooks, volunteers at her church, and dreams about her next adventure. She hails from Minnesota, where she lives with her husband of 30 years, 2 cats, a dog, and a tortoise named Mo. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited to hear about your adventures because obviously you have traveled a lot. And I love the fact that and I'm sure we're going to get into this, that is what has often informed your writing, because I'm sure there's even stories that you have from your travels that haven't yet made them into books. And I'm also, this is a little spoiler alert on it, is I know about your next writing project that you're working on that sounds really awesome, that I'm super pumped about. And I'm going to let you pitch that in just a little bit. But as this show is, yes, it's about you. Yes, it's about books. It's about writing. For me, it's about the coffee. And so I want to know what your favorite writing brew is.
It's all about the coffee. Well, people would call me a coffee snob. I try not to be like too snobby about coffee, but when I'm accused of being a coffee snob, I just tell people that I actually grew up in Seattle. And so then for some reason, that's okay then. Yeah. It's absolutely all right to be a coffee snob if you're originally from Seattle. But I am. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. So we started drinking coffee at an early age at my house. Yeah. So this coffee is called Country Crow, and it's roasted by my sister-in-law. She has a coffee roasting business. Unfortunately, COVID kind of shut it down. So it's really hard to get right now, but maybe in the future. But this one that I'm drinking right now, and that you are too, is called Midnight Violet. That's her name for this particular, I don't know what you call it. Beans or whatever. Yeah. Or this roast. Yeah. And it's named after my grandma, Violet West.
That's awesome. Yeah.
It's my favorite.
Very cool. I am so, yes, it's going to be difficult for viewers to get their hands on it right now, which obviously if they follow you, I'm sure you'll let people know when they can get it. But this is the part of the show that I love, is that I get to try coffees that are so unique that I'm not going to be able to get where I am. And so the fact that I get to try your family's coffee roast, this is thrilling. This is for me. This is really awesome.
So unique that only people in my family get it.
Yeah, right. And now me. I don't know how I got so lucky.
Welcome to the clan.
I was going to say, I guess this does make me a part of your family now. So
absolutely. I'll let you know when the next reunion comes up.
There we go. Yeah. So I have the roast here in my kettle. It is steeping. I like to give it about 5 minutes. And so that is going to act as your timer.
All right.
To sell us your books. Why should we buy Stephanie's books? Okay, so you have 5 minutes.
I've been told I'm the worst marketer in the world, by the way. So there we go. But yes, so my latest book is In a Far Off Land. It's a beautiful cover, by the way, which I just love. And it is the story. It's historical fiction, by the way, set in the 1930s. And it's the story of Mina, who's just a small town girl living in a lonely world. But it's not about the song.
Song comes a little later than when this book is set.
You could have it running in the background though, as you.
Yeah, there we go.
So she's a small town girl who lives in South Dakota, and she decides she's going to run away and make it big in Hollywood. And so she steals her father's, what's left of his money, runs off, and she's going to save the family farm. She's going to show everybody that she is worthy, that she's worthwhile. She's a good daughter. She gets there, and she realizes that the Great Depression is just as bad in Los Angeles as it is in South Dakota. And she kind of makes some bad decisions. She has some real desperate choices she has to make. She really seems like she's going downhill. And then suddenly she gets a chance for her big break in Hollywood, and she's going to make it. She's going to be in a film, like star in a film. But right after that, she wakes up next to her dead leading man, and she is on the run for a murder that she did not commit. So she's in real big trouble. And you kind of see, I don't know, it's kind of the underside of Hollywood, and a lot of the corruption that's going on within the studio system and within the police. She really doesn't know where to turn. So there's two men in the story. So it's a mystery, but there's some romance, because I always love to put some romance in. And there's two men in her life that are helping her. One is her agent, Max, who's very conflicted. He doesn't want to fall in love with Mina at all, but I'm afraid he's going to. And then there's Oscar, who's a Mexican gardener who is very unwilling to help her, but kind of gets dragged into it. And his whole family gets dragged into her problem. And you learn a little bit about the Mexican life in Los Angeles in the 30s, and also about repatriation and how the Great Depression affected, the immigrant communities. So that was really interesting to research. So all this goes on. Mina is in deep trouble, and she has to decide whether she's going to go back to her father in South Dakota and ask his forgiveness, or whether she's going to continue on her path in Los Angeles. So some of this story might sound familiar to people who know the parable in the Bible of the prodigal son. And so I won't tell you what happens in the end, but it is a story of mercy and forgiveness. And just that idea of a merciful father waiting for his daughter to come back to her. So
that's awesome.
In a far off land. Yeah.
I mean, waking up next to her dead co-star. I mean, that's the hook right there.
It is. And actually that came to me in a dream. Like I dreamt that part, and then the whole story came from that one little scene of her like running from this mansion after a big party, running from, this dead man.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it was really fun to research, and it's just the story of my heart, because I really do love that parable. I think it is the parable that we need in our world right now.
Yeah.
Idea of mercy.
And you've also written you've also written some historical biblical fiction as well.
I have a series of 3 books called the Living Water series. And that's really where this story came out of, because that was a lot of research into the New Testament, thinking a lot about the women of the New Testament and what their stories would be. So that's what those 3 books are these women that we wouldn't really have known maybe much about. And then that parable just kept coming back to me. Like, this is such a good story. And Jesus told stories because they were timeless. And I thought, well, I could set this in another time period, because really it applies to every time in the world.
Yeah. Well, you picked a great time period as well, though, to put the novel in, because I love stories and set in that time period of sort of the 30s and 40s, and especially, and I'm sure you could attest to this, even the Hollywood of the 30s being a very crazy place.
It was.
I mean, we think of it as crazy now. So
yeah, it was equally crazy, I think.
Yeah. So I think that's about 5 minutes. We're very scientific here at Books at Brew in terms of our.
I'll have some of mine and see it.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, you've already got it going. So
I do.
That was great. I really want you to talk about what you're working on as your next book, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
Because I need your brew to sip on while you tell us about it. So we're gonna go for the pour. We're gonna see what it looks like in the coffee can. There we go. Oh, this is a good color.
Do you drink black?
I drink it black.
Ooh.
So I drink my coffee black, and I do like a dark roast. So
yeah, that's a pretty dark roast. I should have called Candy and asked her for more details on that roast, but
I'm very excited about this. You can kind of see it right there.
Nice.
Oh yeah. Now, because I don't review the coffee till the end of the show, so you're going to have to decide what you think my face is doing, but I'm a suspense author, so, pretty good at keeping it mystery.
Nice
so,
look.
Yeah. I'm going to give the first sip here.
I'm not giving anything away. I got nothing.
You'll have to wait to the end to find out. If it's still this high, then you'll know. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, I'll watch.
Yeah. All right. So we have our brew. The brew that you drink while you write. So now I feel like I'm going to be as successful as you are. And we're going to talk about your writing process. I got a bunch of questions. Let's start with because we kind of just talked about the books that you have published. And I was reading up on the book that you're working on, which is going back to Los Angeles.
Yes.
And I'm really excited about this one because it combines so much that I love myself, which is, a great time in history and some really great bad guys. And so, so tell us about what you're, I think you just announced it over the summer, what you're working on next. So,
yeah. And in fact, you know how book writing goes. When you announce something, it generally means you're done with it. And
right.
It's your editor because it's still a year out.
Yeah, right.
And so, right now that's off my desk. And I tell you, I miss it because it is such a great story. But I find that most books come out of previous books. So when I was researching In a Far Off Land, I picked up this book called Hitler in Los Angeles. And I thought, what? And I started reading it. And I literally, it was a nonfiction book and it was actually shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize. And I'm like, what? This has got to be made up. Like, we don't know anything about this. Yeah. And there's a reason we don't know anything about it. And I'll get to that at the end. But so apparently when Adolf Hitler was first made chancellor, it was 1933, nobody was really worried about him, obviously. And it's really hard for us to comprehend the word Hitler not being equivalent to evil. But in those days, it was just like, well, another leader in Germany. Germany's a mess. Maybe he'll make things better there. So nobody was really too worried about him. He was a little bit of a fanatic, anti-Semitic, which was not unusual in those days. Anti-Semitism was rampant, like pretty common and not really looked upon as anything to worry someone. So, weirdly. So he was already in those days sending, on the quiet, sending people to the US to start infiltrating the German American groups, especially in Los Angeles, and pretty much radicalizing them towards his ideas because he wanted to have some support in the US. He already knew what he was going to do. I'm convinced the man was an evil genius.
Yeah.
So only one man really saw this happening and was concerned about it. And he was Jewish, of course. He was a Jewish lawyer named Leon Lewis. This is all true. This is not my story. This is just the background.
Yeah.
So Leon Lewis tried to get people to listen to him. And he's like, this is bad. And our German population is becoming radicalized to these Nazi propaganda. And no one cared. They really didn't. They were worried about the communists. And they were worried about the depression and the economy and unemployment and prohibition, all those things in the 30s that were just, really big in the US. And so no one listened to him. And he decided to do something about it. So he started recruiting Christian men and women, and usually of German descent that spoke German, to infiltrate these groups and bring them back information so that he could start compiling stuff on these guys and actually get them deported or treason or do whatever he could to stop them. And the thing was, he was successful. He did a great job. He did it for like 12 years before we even got into World War II.
Yeah.
And so he was so successful that nobody knows about it. Like, what? Anyway, so I wanted to write a story based on this event, this secret event that nobody really knows about. So I have a woman who is of German descent, living in the Depression. She's she's got a family. She's got a lot of people to support. She does not want to get into Leon Lewis's, program. She does not want to be a spy. And yet she is, through circumstances beyond her control, kind of forced and goes and helps Leon Lewis, and then realizes that he's right, that there is some really evil forces at work and that she needs to work against them. So that's what this story's about. Yeah. And it's called Codename Edelweiss, because he actually did give code names to all of his agents. He was
nice.
He was like Ian Fleming before.
Yeah.
So he had all the agents and they reported back to him. He had a code name. It was very cloak and dagger. So that was super fun to write.
That sounds so great. Yeah. Right.
Set in the 30s.
Yeah. I mean, I'm secretly hoping there's a hero with a leather jacket and a fedora also involved in the. Did you read my manuscript? You're right.
There is a pretty interesting hero, but I won't.
But yeah, that is so. This is what I love, and this is a good segue for us into something, into another topic, similar topic. But I love the idea, because I've talked to so many authors about this, of being inspired by real life, because there is so many stories that people sometimes you just don't even know about, that when you hear it, and especially when you can tell or maybe turn it into fiction that's based on it and uses real life events, you're just like blown away, because you didn't realize that was something that actually happened, because for whatever reason, there's so many different reasons that it can fly under the radar for a lot of people. What I do is slightly different, in the sense of I'm often inspired by true life events that then I fictionalize, where it's not the event, right? But I'm like, here's an event that's similar to something that actually happened. A recent example from my novels is my second book was inspired by an event that happened in the 60s, where a businessman ended up swindling the US government and some US banks out of millions and millions of dollars with salad oil.
What? I know, those are the kind of things you're like, really?
Yeah. Where he basically set up this company that made it look like he had all these vast resources of salad oil. But what he would do is, when inspectors would come by, they'd have vats of water with like a thin layer of oil at the top for the inspectors to test or whatever. And he would just get contracts and loans and all sorts of stuff. Had none of it. It was all a sham. And it was huge. And right when he got arrested, and like he had been, it was gonna impact the stock market. Nobody found out about it, because he got arrested when JFK got shot.
Oh my gosh.
And the stock market tanked anyway.
Right. And like, nobody's going to read that in the newspaper when the headlines are all over.
I mean, back of the last page kind of thing, right? Because there's an event that kind of overshadowed it. But anyway, I was fascinated by that story and reading about that story, like this huge, almost like, Bernie Madoff style scheme that was huge for the time, but you never heard about it, because this other event completely overshadowed it. And so anyway, all that to say, I love hearing about real life events. And for you in particular, you get to actually, like, because you write historical and like you're setting your stories within that event. It's such a cool way to kind of get to know about something that's real, versus mine, where I'm inspired by it and I adapt it, but it's not that event necessarily. And so, and I have to imagine that your travels have also done the same thing, where as you've gone to places, as you've heard stories, it has inspired how you write. And so I'd love to hear about that. Like, as someone who travels a lot, how much inspiration you find in those travels and in the stories you hear.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, in fact, although I would almost say that my travel came out of my love of story and history, because I've always been a big reader, especially of historical fiction. My dad and I used to read Michener like when I was 13, and probably, was far beyond me or whatever. But I just grew up loving historical fiction, and then that's when I wanted to travel, because I wanted to see these places, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. But yeah, I think the travel, it makes you realize this.
What you're saying is like you were going to visit the places you'd already read about.
Well, right. It's like
yeah.
Yeah. And it was like, it was specifically, I wanted to see Europe and go to Greece. That was and I did that when I was 17. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what were my parents thinking?
By yourself?
Not really, but kind of. I was supposed to go with a group, and then I left the group, and oh my gosh, we're not going to get into it. My mom is so horrified.
Yeah.
Those are the days where you couldn't text your parents and say like, oh, right. I decided to leave the group and go to Greece.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, I'll still know when I get home.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Anyway, so yeah. But I think it just makes it so much more personal. And you do wonder about the actual people. When you walk in the places that are so full of history, like say the Roman Forum, or, an Italian church, or Greece with all of those, the Acropolis and all of the wonderful, really ancient sites there. You don't think, okay, well, this is where a bunch of old Greek dudes sat around and argued, whatever. You think, what about these people? Like, who were they? And, what were they interested in? And what was important to them? And how did they live their lives, in this heat, or in this, swamp, or whatever. So I think that really does help personalize it when you go to a place, and you're like, what are these people like? And the more I did my research, especially when I was researching the biblical series, because that was ancient, and entirely different types of research than for 1930s Hollywood, obviously, you just realize that they were a lot like us. They just really were. They loved their concerns were the same. They had family. They had, they were worried about the politics of the time. They were worried about whether or not they're going to get a paycheck at the end of the week. Just they're so very similar to us in so many ways. And yet they lived in this entirely different place and time. So that's kind of what came to me every time that I traveled to a new place.
I also am very interested in this particular question for writers. It's come up several times. It's been a while since I've gotten into this, but I'm interested in your plots. If you are a plotter or a pantser, which for those of you who are new, is either you plot the book out before you write it, or you just fly by the seat of your pants when you sit down and write chapter 1. So where would you fall on that spectrum?
I am pretty solidly in the plotter camp. I usually have when I start a book, I have a big tag board, and I use a bunch of little sticky notes, write out like my different scenes on them. I stick it up and I rearrange and I rearrange and I rewrite. It probably isn't very effective way. I'm just warning you, it kind of takes a lot of time, but for me, I'm so visual. I kind of have to see the story all together with some really serious plot points that aren't going to move before I can get started. So I'm a plan.
When I started out, I would write. I wrote a 40-page outline on the first book that I wrote, and
did that work? Though, I mean, if it works for you.
Yeah, I mean, I have condensed from there to where I usually write a chapter by chapter outline now for however long that goes. But I typically, when I start writing, I know how I'm coming into the chapter and I know how I'm coming out of the chapter.
Right.
And so, and then basically however many chapters, I kind of also make it a little bit mathematical where I know how many chapters I'm aiming for and how many words I'm aiming for. And so then I'm sort of like working on that, figuring out where the weak points are and all that kind of thing. As I'm even writing through the outline as well, I'll come up with ideas. And so, but that's typically how I tackle it. So I'm very much a plotter as well.
I might steal that from you. That's probably better than my sticky notes kind of thing.
Well, what's kind of fun for me, well, so again, I'm a suspense author. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to think of, okay, I've gotten you into the chapter, but when I get you out of the chapter, why are you still reading? Where has the story gone and why are you still reading? So that's why I often am thinking about the beginning of the chapter and the end of the chapter, because especially having those sort of climax moments or those cliffhanger moments at the end of a chapter where I've introduced something new that changes the story trajectory, or I've done something to a character that now you've got to find out what happened. And so because I'm a big believer in that being a big part of the key of keeping the reader going and having a tight pace to the book is not letting a chapter just end and
it's like, oh, you want people to say it's the end of the chapter, oh, just one more chapter.
Exactly. And so thinking of each, and this is a screenwriting thing too, which is when you're writing scenes for a screenplay, even this thinking of the scene in terms of a beginning, middle, and end, right? And that's often how you could even think of again, we're maybe diving too deep into outlining books right now, but
outlining's important. I
know, right? Beginning, middle, and end to the chapter, beginning, middle, and end to the first third, beginning, middle, and end. You know what I mean? Like thinking of that beginning, middle, end. Because I think sometimes, and this is what I did early on, which was difficult, was I'm really great at a beginning. I can let's go. And then I'm really great at an ending.
It's not supposed to end. But how do we get there in between? That's the hard part.
And often it'll take a little bit of time, to get not, because here's the thing I think is true. You can get there, but was the middle as good as the beginning and the end? That's what I want to do. And so that's where it just takes a little bit of time, and where I like to be working on those, knowing how those chapters go, finding those weak points, but thinking in terms of that beginning, middle, end structure. So anyway,
I'm writing that down.
My goodness.
I'm writing down your secrets.
I know. No, this is not about stealing my secrets. It's about stealing your secrets.
No. The stealing goes both ways.
All right. Well, I have taken up a lot of your time, and we needed all that was just filler to get to the real meat of the episode, which is the coffee review, which you can already tell. You can probably already tell how it's going to go, which is this was really, really good coffee. Very delicious coffee. I was trying to think of how to say this because it's kind of a weird statement to say. There's usually an aftertaste with coffee, right? And I really enjoy the aftertaste.
Wow. I will pass that
I don't know
what
that means. I don't know what that means, but I was sitting here going usually, it's a strong, especially a strong coffee, like a Starbucks dark roast, I mean, I like it, but sometimes the aftertaste is a little bit
it's burnt, because it's burnt. It's a burnt taste. And
so, but this, I was like, okay, that was good. So anyway, I really enjoyed it. Really, really great. Sorry, no one can get it.
Grandma Violet's a winner.
I just have it. Instead, I tell you what, if you're a viewer and you're like, man, I wish I could get some of that coffee, go buy Stephanie's books instead. And then for every book sold, she will send you. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, wait a minute. Not sure. I was not sure we can say that. I'll send you a little envelope with some beans in it.
There we go. Yeah. Every author I should probably do this, but I've seen I think it's the pre-orders or advanced readers, send out the gift packs and stuff like that. So anyway,
good idea.
It's an idea.
I might use it.
Hey, Stephanie, let us know where we can find you online. Where should we go to find out more about you and your books?
Yes. Well, you can go to my website, stephanielandsem.com. I do a lot of historical blogging there and little bits and pieces that you might find in the book and have want more information about. And mostly on Instagram, as far as social media goes. So you can see me there. It's Stephanie Landsem, and then also on Facebook. So
very good. And you can find out more about my novels at andrewhuffbooks.com. You'll find out about the action suspense novels I write and find all my social platforms there as well. And if you're extremely interested in fiction and writing and all of these things, I encourage everyone to subscribe to my channel to see more episodes of Books and Brew and hear from authors and hear what it takes to be a writer and steal the secrets for yourself as well. And so, Stephanie, it was so great having you. I'm so excited. This is like, this episode has been like the one that like this show was designed for, because I got to try a coffee that like no one else gets to try.
Super secret.
So I'm expecting
super coffee.
I'm expecting to now just write killer. I may try my hand at women's historical fiction now. I don't know.
All right.
Just because I feel ready for it. So
well, it was delightful to talk books with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on. I hope maybe one day we can grab coffee together.
Real coffee.
Yeah, real coffee.
That sounds awesome.